We appear to be live about now. We should be live. Hello, chat. How's everyone doing? I can read everything that you're saying. I don't know how much lag there actually is on the video, whether you've just seen me talk before I click the button or not. But I decided to do a little bit of an impromptu stream today. But before we start, I'd like to ask how everyone's doing. What I'm thinking of doing today is going through the stream I had yesterday, or maybe not going through the stream, but in light of the stream that I had yesterday with Settlers Lament, talking about political praxis, talking about neo-reaction, and talking about the general political right. Because I haven't thought about it in a very long time. I'd say I haven't thought about it in maybe a year. I think I have maybe not some insights in terms of actual political theory to share, but I think that there needs to be a new approach, because this is something that there's a few problems that I've noticed with the hard right, which need to be properly sorted out. Now, I say this as somebody who's a social democrat, right? I'm not somebody who is associated with any particularly right-wing parties. But I say this as somebody who was involved in their thought for quite a while. So I suppose a good introduction... Actually, I'll put the glass. Put it on this side. I suppose a good introduction would be to talk a little bit about my own political experiences, because I think that talking about this is going to set the stage for the rest of the stream. And so I'd like to talk about my I suppose I don't want to call it red pilling, because I think that red pilling is an overused term. But I started out initially politically in like 2012 with, I think it was Anita Sarkeesian, that kind of woke me up to it. And over time I had Gamergate. This kind of woke me away from what was actually, I was originally a communist when I was like 13. Right, I mean, edgy 13-year-old communist, you know. I noticed, social problems, I wanted a solution to them. But, social problems for myself, I might add. But as I got more involved with Gamergate, as I got more into this kind of thought, I discovered more, I suppose you call it neoconservative thinkers, and I also came across the really big important thing was discovering Rotherham and the atrocities there with the Islamic abuse gangs of women, like thousands of girls abused. This particular thing drove me mad a little bit, and it drove me more and more to the right. And the final icing on the cake was when I went to university, and any semblance of libertarianism failed when I observed how people behaved. So I found myself in this situation, and then over time, as I started reading more and more into moral theology, as I started to sort of even out some of my negative habits, I came to a much more white pill, I'm not sure I'd say more moderate, but a less hard, like generically hard right position. I would say that socially, I'm socially in line with the Catholic Church. I'd say that economically, I'd say I'm centre-left, kind of like at least my reading of some of the documents that the Catholic Church has produced. But this ultimately was more of a white pilling away. That's basically what happened. And the reason I bring this up is that I observed this yesterday on the stream, and I think this is very much true for anybody who is ever on the right, ever, with very few exceptions, particularly if they're more into the extreme right. And that is that why people tend to be there is not because what is right, but because what is wrong. So, for example, I noticed on the stream, as I was talking to Ryan yesterday, who did this video on Zoomers, and we had quite a strong disagreement about where the Zoomers fit. Like, for context, I don't necessarily disagree with any of the particular events that he's witnessed or that he's heard about, but I have a more optimistic view than him, most certainly. And I think this is largely as a result of how I've developed since I was really involved in politics. But to return to my point, the large proportion of the people who are on the hard right are there because they're unhappy with the way the society is, and it's the same with the left. The left have their politics of alienation and oppression, the right has their issues because of, you know, a lack of order, a lack of stability in the society, both of which, you know, can be approached, you know, and said to be true. Like, there is such a thing as discrimination, and likewise there's such a thing as a lack of order. I honestly think that the latter is far more pronounced, though. So, in light of this, one of the things that I launched into while I was involved in this sort of right-wing phase was a lot of these very hard right thinkers. Like, one of these thinkers, some of you may have heard of, called Julius Evola. I'm convinced that the only reason that he is actually famous among people on the hard right is because Jonathan Bowden, who was the culture editor for the British National Party, once called him the most right-wing thinker to ever exist. And this is the major reason why I think he's really present on anybody's radar, really. It's the same for a lot of these thinkers as well, with, I suppose you call them NRX adjacent or NRX people. You see the same names pop up over and over again. You see Julius Evola, you see Rene Guénon, you see Thomas Carlyle, you see... I wish you'd see more Joseph de Maistre, even though he was a material heretic. I mean, granted, much better than someone like Guénon or Evola. You see the same figures repeated over and over again. You see Hobbes, that's another one you see repeated quite a lot. You see these counter-enlightenment, counter-intellectual thinkers, and it's always the same people, I've noticed. And so this kind of warps the political thought, at least from my perspective. I might be wrong. Like, I haven't watched a single academic agent stream in a year and a half. I mean, I'm getting this basically just from skimming over, like, occasionally watching Charlemagne or somebody like this, but it seems like there's this same set of thinkers, and up until recently, I think this would have included people like Mencius Moldbug, who has seemed to have been almightily excommunicated from the from this sort of political view that you see online. I suspect because of his becoming popular. I mean, not strictly because of that, of course, but because he was involved with Tucker Carlson. This gave him notoriety, and people started to pick up on his ideas. And I do happen to think that a lot of people are right about the problems of Moldbug. The idea of not really doing anything about it, not doing anything with the problems that are in the society. Because the thing is that there's a certain section of the hard right which is basically black-pilled and thinks that we're beyond repair. And so what they do is that they decide to just talk about politics anyway. So they're going to spend their time talking about a practical science when they don't think there's any practical solution, instead of going and finding other approaches, which is basically what I did. Like, when I started with other channels, I kind of felt like there wasn't much you could really do politically. I thought that the only way that you could approach things was to make people better, because there was no way of solving the issues that I perceived in the society without making people better first. And so I moved more into morals, into spiritual theology, into self-improvement. Initially, I think part of it was because I thought, well, you have all these right-wing men online, and they want to do good with their political views, but they don't have the capability to do so, either because they don't know the particular authors they need to read, or because they don't pray enough, or, etc., etc. Oh, obviously there was a motivation for money as well. That was another thing that played into my mind with the previous channel. So you have a lot of people who are associated together who talk about politics but then do nothing. They don't think there's anything you can do besides sit down. Like, maybe I'm probably misrepresenting Evola here, but this idea of just riding the tiger, just sort of trying to become spiritually good without, while existing in a world that's just doomed to collapse. There's the one side that does this, and I mean, I think that this actually comes more from a faulty view of reality than it comes from, you know, any real reality. That's actually one of the reasons why, if you watched my stream on Settler's Lament yesterday, I was giving, like, I mean, maybe this wasn't the reason. This wasn't the reason why I was giving such strong pushback, but I knew the moment that when I stepped into the stream, I would just hear people going on and 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 on about how bad the Zoomers are, and how, oh, like, you know, society is going to crumble into the ground. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I've been there, I've thought those same things, but it's not helpful. I was not about to sit through a 2.5 hour stream, listening to how bad Zoomers were without giving some sort of pushback. Especially when there are ways of exploiting the situation with the Zoomers that I know can be done, not based on political reading, but based on the fact that I know that human nature is wired a certain way, and so by exploiting this, you can lead people to a better life. That's the first group of the right-wingers. Now, I know this isn't all of them. There's another part that is continually involved in political action. So this would be a lot of the right-wing parties. This would be kind of the irony bros, I suppose you would call them. This was a lot of the alt-right a few years ago. These were people who were explicitly politically, you know, active people in various little parties. Sometimes within what the US would, you know, the US Republican Party, sometimes elsewhere in different ways in different countries, like Patriotic Alternative in the UK, which is a party I will tell you right now that I don't think you should join, because I think that it is I think that I would rather have the Tories in power than Patriotic Alternative. So the problem with these movements, and this is something that I had very first-hand experience of, because being involved in political YouTube for a very long time, I knew how these sorts of things worked. I was involved with UKIP, and so I knew how these things worked. There was always breakdowns in communications. There were always, you know, there's lots of infighting. I mean, it's ultimately what killed right-wing YouTube, or much of right-wing YouTube, back in 2018. You had this problem where people would constantly infight, constantly get involved with just bad operations against other people, and so you had this result where people were in enmity with each other constantly, and a lot of this was to get views, right? So, you know, you kick a beehive and you get views that way. You create drama, you get views that way, and that generates cold hard cash. But it doesn't work for political movements. A lot of it as well is just due to the fact that people are obstinate, people are arrogant, people are angry, people have their minds warped by drugs and by things that are more intuitive to man. You have this situation on the right, and this goes as much for the neo-Nazis as it goes for the irony bros, as it goes for, I suspect, probably within the more centre-right parties as well. You have constant, well, to nick a word from Vladimir Lenin, you have constant factionalism. And it's not as a result, I don't think it's inherent to right-wing thinking. I don't think it's inherent to any particular thinking. I mean, maybe if you took like a weird, like, Gnostic view where everyone could be right or something, it would be. But I think it's largely a result of character defects. I think a lot of people, unawares, have defective characters, and that's what leads to infighting. That's one thing. The second thing, I'm putting this close to the mic, I hope it doesn't get it. The second thing is that everybody on the right is, like, the people on the quote-unquote authentic right, they are all there because they have seen evils in the society. They have seen the behaviour of Zoomers, they have seen Rotherham, they have seen all manner of evil things, and they're united by the fact that they are pursuing the end of these evils. This isn't really the right way of thinking about it, though. I don't think. First of all, it's inherently depressing, which reduces people's ability to act. It's hard to act when you're facing insurmountable sorrow. And second of all, it doesn't really produce any kind of long-term movement. There's no unifying force. There's no unifying factor. And I think the approaches to it, for example, I remember with UKIP, at least I was attempting to try and reform UKIP as a kind of as a kind of a nationalist party after the fall of the European Union, a kind of a changing and rebranding of image so that it could be more competitive in the elections after Brexit was won. And this didn't ultimately work. I think, though, that there is a lack of a comprehension of good. I think you have all of these people online, it seems to me, and like I say, I'm not really in tune with AA or with like a lot of these political YouTubers. I'm only really associated with them now through Settlers Lament. I used to watch them. I used to be involved in their streams. I used to stream. I streamed a few times with Academic Ancient, and like my real reckoning is that if there were good things uniting these people together, that was it. Sorry, I'd lost my thought a little bit there. So there's this focus on just reading the most anti-liberal thinkers possible, because really I think it's motivated not only by an edginess but also an outright hatred of modern society, like an undisguised hatred of how people behave. Right? I mean, and it's, I don't think it's right. I think it's wrong, insofar as people hold that. But it's, you see these things about. This like just pursuing your political thinkers because they're edgy does not work. It produces like an entire mindset around, I hate the society, so I'm going to pick the most edgy opposite reaction, and that's never going to end well, right? We all know what happened in Weimar. Weimar was not a nice place. The Weimar Republic, which was the, for those who don't know, which was the system that was in charge of Germany before the Nazis. It was not a nice place. People starved in the hyperinflation. There was all kinds of degeneracy going on. But that didn't justify the Nazis. Of course, I'm not saying that necessarily the people in the right are Nazis. But what I'm saying is that relentlessly pursuing these anti-liberal thinkers and these anti-enlightenment thinkers just because it's against the modern world, which you despise so much, is not a good political strategy for anyone, and it's even worse if you succeed. What should be done instead is an apprehension of the good. And this is where I come into the point where I talk about, I suppose it would ultimately end up in political praxis, but it would be more a re-examining of political theory, because one of the things I don't really see discussed all that much in an abstract way is that you have plenty of debates about left and right and X and Y issue, but there's never really a consideration of virtue ethics. Right? The one person I can think of who does that is applied virtue. And to some extent I've seen it on Settlers Lament, and I'm sure it's brought up in other places, but there isn't really an in-depth study into basic human goods. Like Aristotle says in his Rhetoric, one of the most important things that a rhetor, an orator, can have is a very good apprehension of the good, and that's what leads people to agree with them ultimately. Another one is effectively good moral character, so sanctity. So you have, it seems to me from the and this is me talking from the outside and with a lack of experience, so if I'm corrected, correct me. It seems to me that there are a lot of people who are united fundamentally by a dislike of the modern society and are consequently reading edgy authors, rather than going, well, I see all this bad, but what is actually good? And so I want to talk here about things that could be read and could be approached such that there could be a redress of balance, which I think would ultimately lead to a far more stable right wing. Not only through the understanding of good and therefore changing the structure of marketing of the right, but also just through being good, which is a far more powerful rhetorical statement than simply having right ideas. Like, one of the things I've noticed actually in chats a few times is that people have said to me, you know, you could look like you could look like a bodybuilder if you want. Wouldn't it be great to look like Giga Chad when you're professing your political ideas? You need to look like Giga Chad so that people listen, and that's an apprehension of the good. That's a legitimate apprehension of the good, of something that I don't have. So there is the doing good aspect as well. And I think in the first place this starts with a proper apprehension of human beings. So let me take an example of someone who is quite popular on the right, and that's Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is a complete physicalist. He believes everything is matter. Now, we know this is false for a number of reasons, because human beings, our minds, the thoughts in our minds are unambiguous, yet every single physical thing, including our brain, is ambiguous, and then from here we can reason that our minds are non-physical. Right? So they're not composed of atoms in the same way as the synapses in our brains. This is one way you can do it. There are numerous others. There's the indivisibility of thought, which is brought up by numerous people. But this isn't really per se what I'm trying to argue about. What I'm saying is that having good first principles down about what a human being is crucial to deciding what you're going to do politically further down the line. Because politics ultimately emerges out of ethics, and so does economics. Economics ultimately emerges out of ethics, and this is ultimately grounded in human nature. So having a proper understanding of, first and foremost, what the human being is, not a man on an island. I don't think anybody in the right actually believes this, but deciding your rights based on a man on an island is absurd, because there is no such thing as a man without a mother and father, with the exception of Adam and Eve. Even like Jesus didn't have a male father, but he was conceived in a way. Right? Every single human being, with 3 exceptions, has a human father and a human mother. And so, therefore, there should be reasoning based on the family as well as the individual. Although it's important to realise that these rights that human beings have, these intrinsic moral rights granted by God, do not come strictly from the family context in which they're in, but come from the faculties of man and its orientation towards the good. This is one thing that needs to be apprehended. It needs to be an apprehending of what a human being actually is, what a human being's relations are. Fundamentally, the family and love, which are 2 things which the right correctly observes are not really that in good shape right now. But I, at the same time, don't think that a lot of people on the right spend their time studying such things. So, understanding these things, understanding what man is, understanding what human relationships are, in a discrete, not only intellectual way, but also in a lived way, right? I don't want a bunch of, as much as I look like a guy who spends all of his time reading. No, Mary was conceived by Joachim and Anne. He had a mother and father. As much as these things shouldn't just be read in books either, they should be lived. Like, there needs to be an act of the will and the intellect. So, when this is done, then consider sound political and economic theories. And even then, there ought to be not just a reading into what human beings are just from pure reason, and what relationships are through pure reason, but there also needs to be an investigation of history, because politics and economics are fundamentally practical sciences. They are practical things. They are not theory. Whether or not I pass, the idea of murder being wrong is ethical, and is a fundamental ethical precept. But how the state deals with that through political policy is ultimately something that is practical. And we establish practicalities by looking at history and seeing what worked. I'm economically illiterate myself, but if I were to approach economics, I certainly wouldn't just take Thomas Sowell or Hayek or Rothbard's word for it. I would go through economic history, I would read the statistics, and I would see how governmental policies and, the various rigmarole of human life, how these things impacted certain products, and then from there come to conclusions and derive principles. That's how I would do it. And the same with politics. Like, just going based, cringe, based, cringe, based, cringe, and talking about authoritarian dictatorships doesn't work. Because authoritarian dictatorships not only violate human dignity, insofar as they do not permit people to interact with the society in actuality and, provide their stamp as they're owed, but they're also not practical all of the time. Likewise, this kind of weird libertarianism where everything is decentralized, it doesn't work. Like, do you know how expensive roads are? They're extremely expensive, and to have large-scale companies like Amazon or internet infrastructure requires giant centralized governments. There's no way of doing this without it. Now, you can live like it's the 13th century in some places. There will be other places where it will be much more plausible. But I think that the good of centralizing resources for the sake of things like infrastructure is just common sense. It improves everyone's life, and all they have to do is pay some tax. And so that's what I'd recommend doing, and I'd recommend just, stop reading the same people over and over again. Like, people have been talking about Evola ever since I was involved with the right. Like, they've been talking about him constantly, and he's not even... Like, let me tell you what a pope said about him. This was, Pope St. John Paul VI, around about 25 years before he became Pope. He says this, and this is from Julius Evola, Radical Fascism and the Lateran Accords, from the Catholic Historical Review. Quote, "Those strange forms of cerebralism and neurasthenia, of intensive cultivation of incomprehensibility, of the metaphysic of obscurity, of cryptology of expression, of pseudo-mystical precocity, of Kabbalistic fascinations magically evaporated by the refined drugs of Oriental erudition. That is how the Pope describes Evola. We have better people. We can deal with these people. We can read other people. And I think... Let me give a few examples of things that should be read. So this is a big book on Catholic social thought. This has, I believe, all of the encyclicals written by the various popes. This goes from the 1890s with Rerum Novarum through to Laudato Si, which I believe was written in... I believe that was written by Francis, actually. So this book here has a whole load of political thought in here, and this is all tied into first principles. I think it's Leo the 13th makes a principal argument for private property on the basis of man's work being done onto the land, and that being an extension of who he is. Right, that's one thing that should be read. If you just want straight political theory, I don't recommend starting with it, though. Another one is reading moral theology, because when you do moral theology, what you're doing is you're taking insights about man's nature and applying it to his action. Because morality isn't just that weird feeling of conscience that you get. It is the application of human faculties in the ways that correspond to the good in the greatest fashion. And something like this, Introduction to Moral Theology by Father Romanus Cesario, would be a good start. And there are numerous different books in this. There's one on sexual ethics, and there's another one. This is a 3-part series, although I have just this one. Now, this third book isn't something I've read, but it might be worth having a look at, and that is Love and Responsibility by Pope St. John Paul II. And it's about relationships and how they work in a philosophical sense, and there's also some scientific data in the back. In fact, the whole theology of the body that St. Pope John Paul II wrote is going to be really useful to anybody on the right, because it will give a framework in which to interpret human relationships which build up the society. And that's just preliminary ones. Let's make a final recommendation. Just reading Aristotle, right? Just read the Nicomachean Ethics, read the Politics, read the Rhetoric, read Eudemian Ethics and things like this. Just sit down and process these things if you want to be coming up with political solutions, because there are political solutions. People are pretending and like staring into the void. You've been staring at the void too long if you think there's no solution. Of course there's solutions. Like, it's not like we live in a uniquely hellish time. There have been former times that are far worse. You know, when the Israelites came into Canaan, they were literally burning their babies to their gods. There have been far worse times in different ways. So don't be bloody black-pilled. The human nature is the same. That's one of the thrusts of the argument that I made on the stream yesterday. That human nature has not changed. When I was speaking of YouTubers, I was speaking of when I was saying about Zoomers wanting to do YouTube as the predominant aim. That's still something. Although perhaps they're right. Maybe it's just because they're lazy. I happen to disagree. I find the idea of just sitting in wealth to be very silly, and I think that Zoomers, for a large part, are smart enough to figure that out. That there is still the desire in man, and certainly in men especially. Like, women don't have this so strongly, but the reason why men are so addicted to video games, I've heard this from Father Chad Ripperger, and I think this is right, is because video games are a kind of tool. You press buttons and you get a certain output. It's wired into men to be more tool manifested and more exteriorly manifested. So, whereas women are more interpersonal. Like, on average, women speak far more words than men, and at least the evolutionary function of this is, or rather, let's put it in nicer terms. The teleological purpose of this is that because a woman tends to speak more, her child develops language skills. That's just one way of approaching it. Someone asked what the first book was. Okay, I'll find it again. It was Catholic Social Thought, Encyclicals and Documents from Pope Leo XIII to Pope Francis. Edited by David J. O'Brien and Thomas A. Shannon. That's Catholic Social Thought, Encyclicals and Documents from Pope Leo XIII to Pope Francis. So, my point is that there is still an inward drive for man to work, or rather to apply his will to something in the exterior world. That's something I didn't make clear in the stream. Like, it's not like people have literally become animals. They behave as animals because their motivations are of the flesh. They're of a lower level, and so they appear to behave like animals, but they still have the same rationality that people in the Middle Ages had. And so, with that all said, I'd like to ask if there's any questions. I see there's a bunch in the chat, so I'm going to read through them. Okay. Is this the transhumor? No. It was in relation to that stream. Yeah. How is it wrong to hate modern society? I mean, I don't think that it's necessarily bad to hate the bad aspects of modern society. There are good aspects as well, like the internet, you know. Excellent tool. You have access to more information than you can possibly imagine right now. But uniting a political movement on the basis of this is not wise. I don't think it makes for a strong family. I don't you don't build a family because you hate every other woman. You make it for another reason. And so likewise political movements should be the same. Based, cringe, based, cringe, based, cringe. Yeah, like who cares? Like, just choose good things. What do you think about Plato? I like some of his ideas, right? But sometimes he has some rather weird, rather interesting takes. I've read a large chunk of Plato, and I can say that there are... I mean, this is granted from an inspectional reading. This isn't like I've read most of the dialogues twice. A lot of the dialogues are better off. You're better off not reading. Like, one of them is even like a lot of them are very useful, but a lot of them really aren't. He's great, but take him with a cup of salt. Can you really blame people for despairing? Well, I think they shouldn't despair. I think that they're not focusing on the correct things. And I think if they wish to succeed, they better stop despairing, because despairing is a vice, and they will just be trapped if they continue doing it. There's no reason. Like, oh no, like Zoomers are doing, you know, X, Y, Z disgusting thing. Yeah, obviously, duh. Just stop reading that, you know that. Start focusing on things you can change, rather than just staring into the abyss repeatedly. Delete your Twitter. What's your advice for those people who are scared of talking to women? Well, you got to go talk to them somehow. Overcome the fear. You have to do something about it, otherwise you're just going to sit paralysed. Right? Like, it's not like women are going to bite your head off and kill you. Someone has just messaged me saying I should stop picking my skin. Yeah. Life is a video game, get good. No. Cup of salt, yeah. Thoughts on René Girard? I don't have any thoughts because I haven't read him. Like, that's just generally the thrust. I'm not sure what... Like, it would be interesting to hear what right-wing YouTube people think. Because it seems to me, as someone from the outside, that it's a whole lot of wheel-turning and a whole lot of not happening. Just focus on what is important. Just focus on... Well, yeah, like, well, what is important, right? Exactly, that's the question they're all asking. What is important? The things that are important are figuring out what the good is and then presenting it through political theory. The whole point of political theory is to acquire good. That's the whole point. And if you're apprehending the good wrong, then why are you even bothering? What, because you get like a rush out of your side winning? What's the point? The rush will last about 15 seconds, and you know what you'll do? You'll destroy the society. If you are in a position of power and you just have false ideas about the good, because you'll be acquiring things that are contrary to it. Thoughts on your moustache? I wish it were thicker. I've only actually been able to grow a beard this last year. I never could before, but it just sort of came about. Please talk about the whole Francis Benedict XVI debacle. Two popes theory, Munus and Mysterium, Ratzinger is the real pope. Ratzinger resigned, Francis is the pope, popes can resign. That's it. What is the good? Good is pure being and is God, true trad waifu, but that doesn't really describe it aptly, I think. There needs to be consideration of the whole of the human person and a consideration of the parts. So, for example, the good of the mind is wisdom. The good of the will is charity. But the good of the whole person is charity. Right? The good of physical parts of the body is health. The good of the society is producing children who are in such a position as to sustain and grow the society. In which case, how do you help secular people comprehend the good? Well, I don't think that secular people really... I don't think it's possible to really... Okay. I don't think it's possible for the good to be comprehended without God, because I don't think it's possible to comprehend being without God. And so, I don't think secularism really has a place. It's like, and when I say secularism, I mean this kind of basically state atheism, or this state agnosticism about the existence of God, right? We know through pure reason that God exists, and it grounds everything else. If you don't have a reasoning principle to the universe, then you can't really conclude anything about really anything. There's no way of apprehending anything. So then in that case, you might as well just do nothing. But in terms of secular people are obviously not consistent. They do recognise goods. And so what you have to do is realise in the disordered psyche of the secular person, and I don't say this because religious people aren't disordered, I'm saying we're all disordered by original sin, but secular people have a particular predisposition in a certain way. You have to understand where they feel the good most expressly, and then pursue the groove of that. That's how you would appeal to secular people. How would they comprehend the good? I don't think they can. Have you read Ratzinger's dialogue with Habermas? And if you have, what did you think of it? Is this Gary Habermas, the guy who does the resurrection stuff? In which case, no. Please, I need clear answers from somebody trusted. Oh, I've already answered. Sorry, I was just like yeah, like just like the whole thing with I was actually planning. There's part of me that was thinking of doing a video rebuking these sorts of trads who deny Vatican II, who deny Francis's papacy, because a lot of these people are doing these really esoteric debates about whether Francis is a legitimate pope when they haven't even read the catechism. Like, a lot of these people are talking about like quo primum novus ordo can't rule because of something that Pope St. Pius V said in a non-infallible document. It's just begs belief. I think these people should just like unironically shut up and just repent, because they like the way they behave with the spewing of these lies. They are doing the work of Satan by, in an incomplete way, with incomplete understanding, drawing people away from the faith. Like saying, oh no, like mortal sin attending novus ordo. Nonsense. Complete nonsense. They should just shut up. It's like they're doing the work of Satan. Let's see. Oh, Jürgen Habermas. I don't know. Have I heard of him? I might have. I might not have heard of him. The name rings a bell, but I nothing really springs into my mind. I'm gonna let guys here build up questions for a bit. I'll be back in 2 seconds. I'm just gonna head off for 2 moments. Alright, I've returned. Yeah, okay, let's have a look. Corruption is like rust, you cannot solve it. Pachamama stuff is a bit Blackpink. I mean, Francis didn't like the Pachamama stuff, go look into it. Couldn't you make a video explaining it a bit? I mean, there's so much confusion around the matter. Like, to be honest, I don't think there is. like Benedict XVI, he resigned. Francis took his place. There's nothing else to it. There's nothing else to it, and people who try and make it appear that way is just Satan. It's Satan. Like I mean, guys, fellas, why would you explain why De Maestro was a material heretic? I think he was a material heretic because he wrote a treatise on the Pope, Du Papa, and it was contradicted by the First Vatican Council. But this was written a good 50 years beforehand. I might be wrong. I might misremember. I might be misremembering. Oh the Second Vatican Council. Oh, it's just fallible, guys. We can just ignore it. No, shut up. You have to obey the discipline of the church as well. Like, it's not like I can just obey the infallible statements and ignore everything else, right? It's like there's this one person I know who thinks that the sign of peace is like this like the bow that we've had after the coronavirus is like this pagan invention, right? And it's come along from like pagan like he called it the Namaste bow, right? It's like Kyrie eleison came from the pagans too. Like, does that somehow make the Mass pagan? And I'll point out, like, it's a sin to disobey the rubrics of the Mass. So when you are sat there, like, omitting parts of the Mass that you don't like, and let's be honest, it is because you don't like them. None of these people who go on about, oh, the new Mass is pagan, blah, 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 right? Like, almost none of these people have any idea what they're talking about when it comes to liturgical anything. Right? The general instruction of the Roman Missal is there to be followed. You are to follow it. It comes from the bishops who are your superiors. Ignatius of Antioch, Saint Ignatius of Antioch, one of the first writers after the New Testament. Like, I believe he even goes as far as to say you should regard him as God in your diocese. Obey him. The germ is proclaimed by the bishops. You obey. You don't get to do all this, like, no, but my novus ordo, but my liturgical abuse. Yeah, sure, liturgical abuse needs to be rebuked. But saying, my novus ordo is like this mortal sin, like, shut up. Just shut up, delete your account. But he doesn't understand, he doesn't know, like Buganini or whoever was involved, like, those sketchy stuff, like, who cares? Pope proclaimed it. Pope infallible. He can do that. That's all there is to it. Just delete your account. Right, okay. I like how people say the fundamental problem of Muldbach is a lack of metaphysics. Do you believe similarly neo-reactionary to spiritual compass like Catholicism? I think it needs an apprehension of the good, and I think a lot of it is spiritual. Right? There is no way that you are going to change society unless you understand how human beings work and can motivate them to be better. Let's see. Have you seen Illuminati's video on the Cathars? Could you give some answers from the perspective of a Catholic if you have it? I'll say this. I think that the Cathars started it. Like, they killed the papal legate. Are they surprised when people came down and started waging war on them? They had, like, one of my priest who is my spiritual director, he did his, I can't remember if it was his PhD or his master's thesis or one of his theses on the Cathars. They used to walk around with pictures of Mary and Jesus with their eyes crossed through. Right? There's a story in Alphonsus Liguori's History of Heresies where he describes how a Cathar angrily threw a book of the Gospels at the besieging Crusader army, or one of the Catholic armies at the very least. Right? These people, besides being insane, or rather having an insane worldview, that if fulfilled to its conclusion would ultimately wipe out the entire human race, like, these people cause so many problems. Like, they like, I don't think they have any real... They weren't sensible on a metaphysical level. I believe they were dualistic in terms of their views of God. But they were also, like, a social problem. They were a serious social problem. Follow-up question. Virtue without religion. Well, I'd say if I was to go, well, actually, religion is considered a vice, which is rendering your due to God. I could make that argument, like, it's a part of justice to be religious, right? In the sense of rendering your due to God. I don't think you can have a comprehensive view of anything without acknowledging the existence of God, let alone virtue. Do I think that atheists can possess virtues? Sure. Of course they can. I mean, this is manifest in the world. Here in my country, there's much heat around the Ratzinger Code and all that stuff. For this reason, I'm trying to find out opinions from outside that sphere, because the discussion is so polarised. Get your head out of the discussion. It's not going to help you. That's my honest recommendation to you. You have all of this, like, all of these people who are just going on, like, oh, don't you know, great apostasy, like, I don't know, whatever, like, the new private revelation says. Like, private revelations exist to remind you what is in Scripture and to stay faithful to the church. They're not here to get you to freak out because, oh, like, fire will rain from the sky. They're there to say, follow God. You will die. Like, you know, one of the things that I wish that Tradcaths would do a lot more is, instead of talking about all of these different obscure, like, private revelations, right? Like, Our Lady of Trefontane, or Our Lady of, well, I mean, not Garabandal, that's condemned by the church. What's the one? Our Lady of Good Success. You know, talking about these things, like, discuss this. You have inerrant revelation here. You have books on wisdom, you have books on history, you have books on moral law. You have all of these things right here in this. Right? You don't, like, just read this instead. Read that instead, and read the Fathers. Like, go and really study the Fathers. Go and really study the theologians. Like, don't stick with the Baltimore Catechism. Like, you've got access to all of these writers, and you could be reading them right now. And instead, you're worrying about the Third Secret, or you're worried about Garabandal. If you're, I don't know why you would be, or you're saying, well, all these people in the church believe in what's the one in Croatia? Medjugorje, right? Medjugorje, yeah, that should be called out, right? Sure, but it strikes me as a little bit ridiculous that people are going over the top about it. Thoughts on Majesty of Reason and his proofs on Thomas Aquinas, and the videos on Thomas Aquinas and his proofs. I made a video on another channel to Joe Schmid. His response didn't make sense, because I pointed out about the abstract nature of being. I can't remember my specific argument. I think it's the argument from participation. It's the argument from participation video that I made, I think. And he said, well, certain Platonic philosophers would consider being to be an abstract object. It's like, that doesn't make sense, though. That doesn't refute my argument, Joe. My argument is that there is something infinitely, not concrete in the same way that Plato describes it in the Phaedo, right, which was the basis of a lot of my proof. But my point is that it doesn't make sense for existence to be just a purely abstract idea. Because to exist is to exist. You would be robbing existence of its fundamental property of existing if you were to reduce it to this abstract, weird, airy-fairy idea in our heads. But that's my thoughts on him. I don't think that his views make all that much sense. I just find that, yeah, it doesn't really make much more sense. And frankly, I think if he converts, it will be something like Padre Pio appears to him in a dream and tells him to cut it out. Actually, that was a bit blunt. I shouldn't have phrased it that way. I wish I could put that back in my mouth, but I do think it will be, you know, he will get a shock someday. Because, I mean, I did when I was playing around with deism. What about millenarianism? Many Catholic miracles talk about it, but it shouldn't be heretical. I mean, like, is there like some tribulation coming? Sure. I mean, but who cares? Like, you have the Gospels, you have the Bible. You read those, you understand them, you understand how to live a moral life, you pray more. Like, don't just pray the rosary, pray the divine office, pray the Psalter. You know, I have a nice version of a Psalter here. This is like £4.10, so this will be like $5-6 US. It's the Coverdale Psalms. Like, you have all of this opportunity. You have 8 hours a day working. That means you have, say, you could have as many hours of prayer as you want. Jesus asks you to pray always. He says so in the Gospel of Luke, right? You could be doing so many more things rather than watching again and again the same things about You know, like, yeah, like I say, you know, Our Lady of Good Success, right? These things have got to be taken in proportion. I think Medjugorje is fake. I've seen a lot of critiques of weightlifting by Tradcats. What do you think? I remember once I used to go to the gym and there was this guy at church who said I wouldn't do that because that's immodest. Or I think it was something along those lines. And I think that's true to some extent, but I think that you have to keep your body in good shape. Like, that's one of the things that I failed to do while I've been in lockdown. I stopped going to the gym, and I didn't get into calisthenics properly. So, I mean, as a result, I'm not in the best physical shape. I think that it's necessary to have to be in good physical shape. Of course, I think that it's very, very important. Obviously, you shouldn't become like a crazy power lifter who can barely walk, right? But there needs to be like development of that, but it also needs not to be flexed. And that's the problem. It could be an occasion of sin for you if you do that. That's your own calculus. If it's going to lead you to pride, stop it. Find other ways of remaining healthy. If it's not, then I don't know why it would be wrong. Has there ever been a comprehensive Catholic response to Spinozism? I mean, Spinozism is pantheism, so I'm sure there are plenty. Let's see. Oh yeah, I don't doubt that Medjugorje is... Actually, I'm not sure. Now think about it. Right, we've been going for quite a while, I've just realised. So I'm going to bring the stream to a close. I hope it's been useful for everybody. And I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.